Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Van. I'm the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group, and I have RoseMarie Terenzio with us today. Welcome, RoseMarie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I'm going to take us back a little bit here. JFK Jr. and his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, were, as any of us who lived through the 90s know, the quintessential it couple. For those of us who came of age in that era, we remember our nation's fixation, and I would say, and I'm sure you would agree, RoseMarie, outright obsession with JFK Jr. and, of course, by extension, his equally beautiful and captivating wife, Carolyn Bessette. And nearly 20 years after their passing, they're once again in the headlines, and this is due largely in part to the Hulu docuseries Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr., Carolyn Bessette. And as is our practice on this program, we're really interested in telling the stories of those who are one degree removed from the headliners, so the supporting cast, if you will, to the main character. And I'm hard-pressed to imagine any two people who were more in the headlines than JFK Jr. and Carolyn Kennedy were. Our guest today knows that really intimately because RoseMarie spent 5 years as the chief of staff to JFK Jr. at George Magazine, where she was the ever-vigilant gatekeeper between him and the external world that was always hammering at his doorstep. RoseMarie is also a two-time, it's crazy, not even one time, RoseMarie, two-time New York Times bestselling author of Fairy Tale Interrupted, and she's the co-author of JFK Jr., an Intimate Oral Biography, and she's also the executive producer of the documentary I Am JFK Jr., and today you are the VP at Avoq, which is one of our country's top strategic communications firms. So your current work focuses on shaping how organizations and leaders tell their stories. And today's conversation is really going to be about what it means to actually support an icon and to really manage a myth, right? While simultaneously knowing the man who is probably just a regular person. And of course, the evolving relationship of celebrities to media, particularly since their heyday in the 90s and how that has evolved and shifted over the years. So it's a lot to cover. Thank you again so much for being here. Welcome, RoseMarie.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Talking about taking us back, you describe yourself as a blue-collar girl from the Bronx. Is that accurate?
Yeah, working class family. My parents worked 2 jobs. I grew up in a house with, 3 older sisters. My great-grandmother lived with us. My grandmother lived upstairs. So it was chaotic. We didn't have a lot growing up, but we had a lot of love and craziness. And as my father once said, even the girl is a dog. I'm sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. I can't
get a break.
Right.
Even the dog is a girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was
very outnumbered.
Chaotic. Poor guy. Yeah.
I feel like I can picture your family dinners. I feel like they were a lot like mine were.
Yeah.
Loud and chaotic and fun and inappropriate, lots of boundary crossing, good times.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So walk us through your background. How did you go from, how did you get your start and how did you end up supporting JFK Jr.?
I started in PR, sort of fell into it and through an internship from college. And then as I was making my way through, different jobs, I worked worked for Michael Berman, who had a boutique PR firm here in New York. And it was great. I loved that job. I worked for Michael for 2 years. And then Michael was, we knew in the office that he knew John, because John would call the office from time to time, and they were on the board of a charity together. And suddenly John started coming in a lot more. And one morning I came in and he had packed up my office and was taking it over. And I think I said to him, "Why do you need an office? You don't even have a job." So that was the start. Because I was really mad. I was annoyed.
Yeah.
I was pissed. I was like, I have this really cute office. I finally have my own space here, and
Probably had picture frames up and a plant and everything.
Waltzes in and takes it over. And I was a huge Howard Stern fan, and a friend of mine got me a signed copy of a headshot from Howard, and he took it off the wall and it ripped, and oh gosh, I was furious. But anyway, that's how we started. And then eventually came to realize that they were starting George Magazine, and Michael was selling the PR firm, and I was devastated. I'm like, well, what happens to me? You know, I was in my 20s. It was like my first real job, you know, and I was so excited about it. And you know, they sort of said, well, you know, maybe let's see what happens, and we could use some help, and we need help answering the phones and figuring out sending stuff out and all of those things. So I stayed on, and eventually John said, you know, my mom's folks have retired and I don't have someone, and if I'm starting this magazine, I need someone. Do you want to come on board? So I did. And I think what happened in the process of the transition was that we got to kind of check each other out before we made a commitment. And so, you know, we had the same sense of humor. We got along pretty well. And I think he realized that I was discreet and I was loyal. And I think that was the biggest thing that made it work.
Yeah. And not starstruck, I would say. I mean, it seemed like you were pretty
not
feisty.
Yeah, it wasn't my kind of celebrity. Like, if it was like Sean Penn or somebody like that,
right?
Or Brad
Howard
Pitt,
Stern.
sure.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, forget it. Yeah, but John was not in my celebrity fan book.
Yeah, great.
I guess that was a good thing.
Yeah. So John was, I mean, essentially American royalty. Certainly the closest thing that our country has ever experienced to a royal lineage. So what was it actually like to be that close to someone that the world revered and platformed to the extent that they did?
You know, the thing about John that I thought was remarkable was that he took the elephant out of the room immediately. He was down to earth. He was casual. He'd say, "Hi, I'm John," or "Hi, nice to meet you. My name is John." There was something about that made everyone go, "Oh, okay, he's normal." You know, recently I was at an interview at CNBC with a CEO. It's actually a few months ago, and he had his folks with him, and he walked in the room. And he was the CEO of this major publicly traded corporation and spoke to no one. Didn't introduce himself, didn't say hello, interacted only with his immediate staff. And the first thing I thought was, oh my God, John would never do that. He would shake hands with everyone who was sitting in the green room. He'd say hello. You know, he'd be fidgety, but approachable, you know, and I think that had a lot to do with his confidence and his manners.
Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but I think too, like, there was this sense of like the populace really having a connection to him and sort of being, you know, entitled to him in some way. And I think maybe because, you know, his family, having known him since infancy, seeing him grow, that, you know, there was this connection to him and the public at large versus like these ivory tower CEOs that, trade on their kind of exclusiveness and inaccessibility, and they're behind 20 layers of security and whatever. Like it was like he kind of grew up with the nation, and maybe by extension, he also offered himself a little bit more willingly than others might, like this CEO that you described.
What John's situation was that he didn't know it any other way. He was born famous, basically. His parents were, famous. President, first lady. He was the most famous child in the world. And then, unfortunately, when his father passed away, it was, again, this moment of him at 3 years old being the face of the grief of the entire nation. And I think that that's where that emotional connection came from. And I think his accessibility and the way he lived his life actually strengthened the connection. So there were I don't recall any hostility toward him. I think there was a genuine feeling of protecting him and revering him, but protecting him.
Right.
And I think that made it easier for him to be more open when he met strangers and when he met people.
That's really interesting. It's like he was America's son.
Yeah,
something like
he
that.
was.
Yeah. So you mentioned that he kept this sort of image of accessibility and permeability, and obviously, like you said, people felt very entitled and wanted that access. So how did that public pressure for access shape the way that you had to approach your role? Because obviously there are needs for boundaries and limitations. So, how did you have to adjust in your role in order to do that? And did it ever feel like an impossible or unmanageable task to be able to be an effective gatekeeper for him?
I think what I did was I tried to be as observant as possible and really listen and observe who the folks were that were there and who were accessible to him and who he wanted to have access to him. And that took some time, In the beginning, I would say, oh, so-and-so called, and I'd give him the message, and he'd say, I don't know who that is. That's so I think it was a lot of observing, quietly observing, trying to pick up on the cues of what was good and what wasn't, what was, how accessible he wanted to be to something and how he didn't. And there were times that I made mistakes, and I said, oh, you're going to such and such. They called and said you're having breakfast with them. And he said, no, I'm not. I don't know that person. I don't know why he scheduled that. They sounded important to me. So I put it in. But for the most part, I took my cues from him.
And I think there's a definite strong parallel in what you just said with many of the listeners of this program who support high-profile individuals. They may not be JFK Jr. status, but they support people who are constantly being pelted with requests and people who are, framing themselves as something that they're not. So is a level of vigilance and observation that you have to have. So there's a line from one of John's friends in your book, and it says, John couldn't stand to be bored. How did that restless energy transfer to his work and to his personal life? And how did you keep someone like that focused and also protected when his own instincts seemed to fight, that containment and that need for privacy? How did you navigate that?
I think what John had was an insatiable curiosity about so many different things. He went to the theater. He'd be reading 3 or 4 books at a time. And at George, the way it manifested was there were times when, we're making a connection between politics and pop culture. And in the magazine, that had to be a through line. And he would say, oh, there's this great jazz musician. I'll go get his book. I want to do a story. And I'm like, no, we can't do a story on the jazz musician because there's not a connection. You'd have to kind of thread that for him. So that, But for the most part, I think he wanted to always expand what was covered in the magazine, what was happening with the magazine, and the staff. And I think one of the things that he did really well was he didn't hire just magazine people. He didn't hire just editors, writers from magazines. He wanted people who were writing and producing for MTV. He wanted to hire people who were coming from not just journalism, but media overall. He thought that more perspectives were always better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And managing that was, to have to say to folks, please do not bring that in there, because if you do, he's going to go off on a tangent. He's going to go for it. And I'm going to have to reel him back in and say, no, not right now. We have to do this first. But for the most part, I mean, it was really an insatiable curiosity that he had.
Yeah. So you were largely in charge of keeping him focused and keeping his head from swiveling in too many directions.
Yeah, and also keeping other folks from being able to do that.
Right.
Because I think there were times when, as I'm sure there are with many, high-profile folks and folks, CEOs and folks like that, executives, that, they don't want to be inaccessible. They want to be able to engage, and they want, but you have to put a boundary there, or you never get anything done.
Yeah, that's fair. So as we said in the intro, I mean, John and Carolyn were the it couple of their time, and every public up and down was itself a story or a headline. And with the tabloids and Page Six on top of him constantly. Did you find yourself having to run real-time PR for them? And what were the moments where you had to really think fast to get control of the narrative or help them recover from something?
I think that for the most part, John did not talk about his personal life. So what it was the bombardment of incoming and not a lot of outgoing. So it was my job really for me to be accessible to the media and be polite and maintain good relationships, but also, and I think my PR background, what I learned from working for Michael, helped a lot, because you don't want to make enemies of the media. As John used to say, you don't pick a fight with folks who buy ink by the barrel. And it was important to keep those relationships cordial. Yeah. So I think that the difficult part was how to keep the relationship cordial, but not giving any information. So being able to say no in a way that they understood, this is not personal to you. This is not something that I'm not going to another outlet and talking about it. We're just not talking about it.
Not talking.
Yeah. And I think that was the difficult part, for my position, was always feeling a little bit like, how do you walk that line of being accessible and cordial, but firm and absolute in not disclosing.
Did the weight of that public scrutiny, did you ever see it take a really exacting toll on him?
I think it took more of an exacting toll on him for Carolyn, because you had a situation where when he was single, it was just him, and he knew how to manage it. He had grown up with it. It was part of his everyday life. And I think the thinking was, when he got married, I think we all thought this, foolishly, that the interest and the hunger for information would kind of peter out a little bit, because he's married. He's not, sexiest man and most eligible bachelor and all of that anymore.
Right.
And it didn't. It actually intensified. Yeah. And that was surprising. And I think the fact that the media and the paparazzi behaved very differently toward Carolyn when she was alone than when she was with John. And that frustrated him, because when he wasn't there, she was getting, hammered. Treated pretty poorly, and hammered. And I think that's what was frustrating for him, because he was walking a line where it was like, part of him was like, just do your thing, live your life, and keep it moving. And for her, it's really difficult to do that when they are screaming at you, chasing you, bombarding you with lights and microphones and questions and all of that.
Yeah, it is outright harassment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think the interest intensified? I mean, because I'm a child of the 90s. I saw the People magazine, Sexiest Man Alive. I was in the grocery store checkout line. I mean, this was my era, right? And why did it increase? Because, I mean, you make a good point where it's like, you know, he was no longer available. Like, why the fixation?
Because I think it's exactly what we referenced previously, which is the emotional connection that people had to him. And they felt like they wanted to know, who is this woman? Is she good enough for our
boy, our son,
John? Yep. And what does this mean for the future? Because I think John also represented, you know, hope for the future in this country. And I think that they wanted more information about how is this going to play out for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of Carolyn, you also, you know, befriended her during the time that you supported John. And she was a force of nature in her own right. You know, she worked her way up at Calvin Klein. She had an incredible instinct for culture, for trend setting, for style. How did your friendship with her shape the way that you did your job? And was there anything you took away in particular from knowing her in the intimate way that you did? And I'm sure she would not have shown up to an interview with wet hair. I can promise you that much.
I don't know about that. I wouldn't be so sure about that. No, I remember her getting out of a car to go to a black tie event, and she's like, "Hold on a minute," and she's brushing her wet hair, putting it in a ponytail, and then she hands him her little brush and says, "Put this in your pocket. It doesn't fit in my purse." So.
That's great. That makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
She was, I think, you know, in terms of doing my job, I think Carolyn was so valuable to give me the sort of heads up on, you know, timing on things, when to approach things, when to back off things, what he'd said to her about certain situations or requests or anything like that. And she was kind of my shadow advisor in that way. So it helped a lot to be able to bounce things off of her in terms of when is the right time to approach this? When is the right time for him to do this? What's going on personally that I should know about? So I shouldn't schedule XYZ at this time. And I think that was super helpful. And also in her giving me, you know, being my champion. You know, she really was the person who went to him and said, "Hey, you need to give her a raise," or "Hey, you need to buy her XYZ," or "It's her birthday." You know, she really was a champion for me. And she wanted to see me succeed and progress. And that was really important because I know there are times when, you know, an executive spouse is not, male or female, is not always accessible to the assistant in that way.
Yeah. And that says a lot about her compassion and ability to recognize and see people, you know, and not just sort of take people for granted, but to see you and your effort and your contribution and to want to, you know, see you thrive.
And I think that goes back to her situation as a working girl who worked her way up the ranks, and she was able to identify with it.
Working girls unite, huh, RoseMarie?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the 90s, you know, celebrity news and content was really driven by tabloids back then, right? We had Page Six, we had The Post, we had
A Current Affair.
Yes, exactly.
Hard Copy.
All of them. That's right. Hard Copy. God, I had forgotten about that.
Yes.
There were no smartphones. There was no social media. I know our younger listeners are like, what? But there was no ability for anyone with a camera phone to just suddenly take a picture and become a journalist, right? Upload it and boom, you're a journalist.
Exactly.
So what did protecting someone's privacy and reputation look like in that environment of the 90s compared to what does it look like today in the work that you do? And would you say that today's media practices make it easier or more difficult for people whose job it is to protect and manage a public figure's image or reputation, than, for instance, in the 90s?
Well, in the 90s, you had places you would go where they were private, or they were, I wouldn't say private, but they were sort of, hidden, or they were just regular places to go. And there was this sort of idea, in the 90s of, well, if you go to if you go to the Four Seasons and you sit in the middle of the room, journalists that are there, people are going to see you. If you go to Elaine's, or if you go to, there were certain places that you'd go to get noticed. Mm-hmm. But then there were the million other places that you could go that were just, either more protective or just not a lot of people knew about or frequented. So you could kind of have privacy in that way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you have every single place you go, as you said, everybody's a journalist. Everybody has a phone. Everybody has a camera. Everybody has instant access, but via text and mm-hmm. Email to tell mm-hmm. people what's going on in the room. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think there are two things that I really miss about that time. One is that you could go out, you could leave the office, and work was done. There was no one calling you at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 12 o'clock. There was no way to reach you other than if you happened to know what restaurant I was at, you could call the restaurant and have me paged, but that happened once. Yeah. But other than that, you were able to sit and be present and have a conversation with your friends, with whoever you were out with. But the other thing that I think that's missing so much is you noticed the room and the people in the room and what it felt like and what it looked like and what kind of music was playing, and you enjoyed your food and you talked about what was going on in that moment. Mm-hmm. And now I think we've lost a lot of that. Mm-hmm. I think you go to dinner with folks, especially if they're in the business I'm in, which is crisis communications, and it's this constantly on the mm-hmm. phone, mm-hmm. and you miss so much around you, and you miss, like, I went out to dinner 2 weeks ago and was in the middle of a crisis thing that popped up right before I arrived, and I can't even tell you what I ate for dinner. I can't even remember half the conversation I had with my friend who I was at dinner with. And that to me is sad, because I feel like those rich, interesting conversations mm-hmm. are now, they don't go as deep because
they're
you're
truncated.
Distracted.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, well, people
and
aren't
it's
present.
a habit.
Yeah.
It's a habit now. You just pick it up in the middle of dinner, and no matter how much you try to put it away, there's definitely a pull to pull it out and look at it. And I think we're getting bombarded with information, but mm-hmm. we're missing so much.
And I think too, like, it seems to me that in the 90s, you could maybe have a run-in or an encounter with a high-profile person or celebrity, and maybe there's a chance you wouldn't even know, right? You wouldn't even recognize them because, now instantaneously it's like, oh, wait, is that so-and-so? And you
I can look them
Google
up.
Their image. Oh my gosh, that is that person, right? And so, like, this whole concept of anonymity is so compromised because it just absolutely doesn't exist. Period.
No, it doesn't exist, and it has a lot to do with, obviously, with technology, but I think it's also the way we're fed information constantly, mm-hmm. our feeds mm-hmm. and our mm-hmm. bombardment of advertising and the the extraction of personal information for everything you do. I mean, you can't order a lipstick on Amazon without entering, without almost scanning your birth certificate.
Literally.
So it's a lot of that too, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of younger folks, Gen Z and millennials are so fascinated with love stories. I think mm-hmm. they're nostalgic for that, and they're like, wow, I wish mm-hmm. I grew up like that. they don't have that. They don't have that experience of just being present.
Fair. So for the EAs and chiefs of staff who are listening to our program today, what role do you think they can and should play in strategic communications and in protecting their executives' public image? I know you specialize in crisis comms, and a lot of the people that we work with, a lot of people that listen to this program, work with the CEOs who find themselves in the center of a scandal of some sort, whether it's a major security breach or some kind of insider trading thing or a harassment allegation or whatever. So what role do you think is appropriate for that EA to play? And on the flip side, what situations warrant bringing in someone like yourself to step in and take over? What does that look like?
Well, I think for EAs, there has to be and there should be a level of crisis training for them. And not only externally, but internally, because they are the front line. They know things that no one else in the company knows. They have access to information that no one else has access to information to. And I think it would be really beneficial to both an executive and an EA to have those conversations. Okay, if something were to happen, who is the first person you would want me to call? It might not be their wife or their children, or it might be a brother, it might be a cousin, it might be my lawyer, it might be, internally as well. Who are the folks that I should be relaying information to, and who are the people that I should be holding information back from? And they should be, because like you said, you can take a picture of someone and Google them and find them on LinkedIn. If a journalist is looking for a scoop or a story, or there's a situation, the EA is the first person that they're going to try to find, because they know the comms people are going to be in lockdown. And if your EA is not trained on how to respond or how not to respond, or what information they should be getting from a journalist or an outside source that's looking to get a scoop or get information, they should absolutely be trained on that.
Yeah.
It should be a requirement.
It should be. I'm so glad to hear you say this, because I think that it is a big missed opportunity, especially when you're the founder CEO of a very high profile startup. Let's say you're constantly in the headlines, or a public company. I mean, you know that you're just going to be bombarded, and it's only a matter of time before something hits. And yeah, it reminds me, like I don't know if you have earthquake drills in New York. You probably don't, right? Yeah, you guys don't have earthquakes. Yeah, California kid. Earthquake drills, right? Like that was a thing. You practiced it. It was routine. It was duck and cover, back to the window, right? And it's the same kind of thing where if you don't have that muscle or that training, in this case, the muscle memory, then everything hits the fan and you are naive. You are a deer in the headlights, because you're skittish. You don't know what to say. You very well could say the wrong thing. So it is something that I think should absolutely be embraced as part of the EA protocol. Is that something that you do? Do you offer that kind of training and development for EAs?
Yes, I've done that, and we also do all different kinds of scenario planning, tabletop exercises. We get really down and dirty. We make uncomfortable conversations that need to be had with the organization as a whole. And I think the thing that I do that I don't think other crisis PR folks do or understand, because they don't have the experience, is having a one-on-one conversation with the EA and the executive. The two of them should also have their own conversation. And what we do is we prepare what we call IDI questions, in-depth interview questions, for both the EA and the CEO, and they answer those questions. And we sit there and we say, here's a tabletop exercise. What happens if this? What happens if that? I mean, my situation was, thank God, rare, but that's a conversation that I would have loved to have had with John before this happened, which is, if something happened to you, what would you want me to do? What are the things, who are the people that I should contact first? What are the things that I should be preserving for you, for your family, for the organization? Because the other thing that people, I think, miss the boat on with the role of an EA, if you reverse those roles, an EA could do a CEO's job for one day. A CEO could not do an EA's job for one day.
I think that comment just made you the most popular guest we've ever had on this program.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, they know enough to be dangerous and damaging, and also know enough to be incredibly helpful and powerful. And that's the double-sided thing of it.
And when I look at that situation with John, and the reason why I think the EA training is so important with the CEO, not themselves out in the ethos, because it doesn't make sense if it doesn't happen together, and it doesn't make sense if the executive and the organization is not on board.
Right.
I think having those conversations, and the first person everyone called was me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well,
Where
I think
do we get information?
You said it so well before when you said they're not going to call the comms people because they know they're media trained, they're savvy, and also they're probably in a room somewhere in lockdown, strategizing, figuring things out. So they're going to call
they're in a war room.
Yeah, they're in the war room, exactly. So they're going to call the one that they think they can pick off most easily. And I mean, I'm like in my head, I'm replaying. There's so many things. It was just a headline couple weeks ago, Sam Altman, OpenAI founder and CEO, was his homestead was attacked in San Francisco, right? I mean, like, what a perfect example of something that, invariably warrants crisis communication. And you wonder, like, were the people closest prepared for something like that, right? When all the media people were hounding them.
All the media people were hounding them, and also the first person I would call if I were a journalist is the EA, because I'd be like, well, where is he? Was he home? Who's going to know that? They are.
Yeah, exactly. So considering this work that you do now at Avoq, what is the through line that you can draw from your time with John at his side to now? Like, what's that thread of continuity, and how do the skills that you built protecting him and supporting him translate to how you advise organizations and leaders in the work that you do now?
I think the through line is open communication. The through line is knowing the facts as quickly as possible and disseminating information as quickly as possible. You want to do prevention. You don't want to do cleanup. And when you're prepared in a crisis, the cleanup is much harder, especially today with social media, like we said, 24-hour cable news, all of that, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the social media tools at our disposal, LinkedIn. The protocols that you put in place are plug and play for most crisis situations. And I think the quicker you put information, factual information in front of people, the more it lowers the temperature. And I think it's okay to say, I don't know yet. I don't have that information yet. Because saying nothing leaves it to the folks who are speculating. And if you can say, I don't have that information yet, but I'll get back to you. Or when you, and also I think, the most important thing in a crisis is understanding the organization prior to a crisis, understanding what the weak spots are, understanding where there's vulnerabilities, and also what are the likely scenarios. If you're an organization that handles food, your crisis scenario is way different than a company that doesn't or does software. There's cybersecurity on one end, and then there's actual physical food on the other. There's all different scenarios, but there is a protocol that applies to all.
And I would imagine that it's really incumbent upon companies and their leaders to to just know that this is inevitable, regardless of, like you said, regardless of what industry you're in.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. If you're high profile enough, at some point, something is going to catch fire. And are you prepared? Are you ready? Or are you caught, with whatever, your pants around your ankles?
And it's not just within the organization. I mean, think about it from a geopolitical perspective now. How do the geopolitical shifts affect your organization? Because they do. And if you're putting your CEO out there to talk about XYZ, and they're the head of an oil company, and we go to war with Iran, what are they going to say? So
right.
there's constant maintenance that you have to do in crisis situations and refresh those plans.
Right.
Just like you do for earthquake drills.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I have a final question for you, RoseMarie, which is, we like to ask this of all of our guests. If there's someone that you could support throughout the course of history, time, you name it, who would you pick and why?
I think it would be George Washington.
Oh, okay.
He was a founder.
Uh-huh.
He founded the greatest proof of concept experiment in the world, the United States of America, and he became president.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. No kidding. That's great. How can our listeners get in touch with you if they're interested in pursuing maybe some of the media training that you talked about, or any of that readiness, or if they even have a crisis comm situation that they'd like your counsel on? How can they get in touch?
Always reach out to me on LinkedIn. They can always find me on LinkedIn, and they can also email me at rterenzio@rmtpr.com.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation. I loved it.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.